안녕하세요. 매일매일 운동하고 있는 동탄 왕호입니다. 오늘은 원래 새벽 출근하는 날인데 교육이 있어서 정시 출근을 했습니다. 정시 출근이라는 말은 아침 8시까지 출근을 했다는 얘기고요. 날씨가 되게 좋습니다. 미세먼지가 있는지 없는지 모르겠네. 미세먼지가 있어요. 네, 있어. 낮은데 되게 뿌엽니다. 그래서 오늘은 창문을 열지 않도록 하겠습니다. 그래서 내일은 새벽 출근이에요. 무슨 얘기하지? 운동해야겠죠? 오늘도 서서 교육을 받았더니 다리가 좀 아픕니다. 드디어 내일 모레 미용실을 갈 겁니다. 3일 뒤구나, 3일 뒤. 미용실을 가서 머리를 할 거예요. 운동을 하도록 하겠습니다. 스쿼트랑 팔굽혀펴기를 할 거예요. 일단 스트레칭 위주로 최대한 하도록 하겠습니다. CNN을 보면서요.
Meantime, the National Memorial Day concert will not have an audience on hand this year. It'll just be a virtual one. Though Americans may not be paying their respects in person, this Memorial Day weekend will not go by without Americans in various ways honoring those who made the ultimate sacrifice. Boris Sanchez, CNN, Washington.
Meanwhile, President Trump was spotted getting some recreation in while seemingly ignoring the advice of one of the experts on his own coronavirus task force. CNN's Christian Holmes has the details.
President Trump spending his Memorial Day weekend similar to hundreds of other Americans across the country, outside and without a mask. President Trump golfing for the first time since early March, and he was seen not really social distancing and not wearing a mask. But one of his closest advisors and the coordinator of the coronavirus task force, Dr. Deborah Birx, expressed a lot more caution. She said that people should be social distancing, and she explained that there is science behind wearing a mask. Take a listen.
We have said to people is there's clear scientific evidence now by all the droplet experiments that happen and that others have done to show that a mask does prevent droplets from reaching others. And out of respect for each other, as Americans that care for each other, we need to be wearing masks in public when we cannot social distance. It's really critically important.
And Dr. Birx also raised questions as to whether or not the U.S. was doing enough to test and trace asymptomatic carriers of coronavirus. But I do want to note one thing here. We heard President Trump saying that we're back. He also said that they weren't going to close down the country again no matter what happened. And it's important to note this, especially after a weekend like this one where we saw hundreds of people out on beaches, outside, not social distancing and not wearing masks, that the decision to close or open the states dependent on cases is done by the governors. So those governors, some of whom have already really pled with the citizens, the residents of their state, them to wear a mask, to be safe, those are going to be the ones who are going to try to do what's best for their community as we move forward. Kristen Holmes, CNN, the White House.
And right now, the world's largest economy, the United States, is suffering from massive unemployment. 43 states hit record high numbers for people out of work last month. The national unemployment average is hovering around 15%, and that translates to nearly 40 million Americans losing their jobs since mid-March. In an interview with CNN on Sunday, a senior White House advisor painted an even more dire picture to come.
My expectation is that since there's still initial claims for unemployment insurance in May, that the unemployment rate will be higher in June than in May, but then after that it should start to trend down. So I think we're very, very close to an inflection point in terms of business activity and probably about a month away in terms of employment.
You think unemployment is going to be even higher?
Yeah, it's going to be quite a bit higher. And you know, there were some technical things they kind of messed up, and on an economics lecture we go into them, but it could be if they fix the numbers and fix the thing that they mischaracterized last time, that you'll end up with a number north of 20%.
Well, meanwhile, New Jersey could soon be forced to make major budget cuts unless the federal government comes to the rescue. Governor Phil Murphy estimated that his state will have a $10 billion revenue loss, which could force him to lay off some frontline workers.
We announced a budget on Friday for the next 4 months, and we had to cut or defer over $5 billion of expenditures. And this includes potentially laying off educators, firefighters, police, EMS, healthcare workers. This is not abstract. This is real. It's not a blue state issue. It's an American issue.
Well, so far, both the White House and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell have resisted calls to provide federal relief for states facing budget shortfalls. Well, protest and crackdown in Hong Kong. Thousands of people defying police and braving tear gas to tell mainland China to keep its hands off their freedom. CNN reports from Beijing. That's next. Plus, the Israeli Prime Minister is defiant as he faces his first day in court. Details on what comes next in his corruption trial are just ahead.
My name is Maria Campo. I'm from Colombia. My business is a flower business. We are traders. We export flowers to Japan, USA, Europe, and Russia. Fortunately, in Colombia, we are able to operate our business because we are in agro business. But of course, it's been affecting us because the demand is low right now. I invite people to stay in home with flowers because it helps to feel better, to feel happy, to feel like a companion, to see the flowers opening. That is going to be a positive effect in people. So the idea is to stay home and buy flowers.
Russell Wilson might be known for his quick moves as the Seattle Seahawks quarterback, but off the field, the Super Bowl champion has been helping his community during the pandemic and motivating others.
I can inspire you guys in any way. First thing is love big. The second thing is to serve big. And the third thing is to forgive big.
Alongside his wife, singer Sierra, the two have already donated more than 1 million meals to help feed those struggling in the Seattle area. They also offered a double date night in the All In Challenge, a fundraising auction to help fight food insecurity due to the virus. Their date night raised nearly $250,000 for the cause. Many other stars are all in, including Tom Brady. His auction, which included a dinner or workout, game tickets and game-worn jersey, collected $800,000 for relief efforts. For more information on how you can help during this pandemic, go to cnn.com/impact.
Certainly from the beginning at the AMA, we have been talking about the critical need to focus on the science and the evidence and the data, and that really should lead all of our response. This is not political. This is a public health crisis, and if we use the data correctly, we can again get on the other side of this. But we cannot deny the data. The data and the facts are there, and knowing that information really helps us it doesn't hurt us. Knowing the data and the facts doesn't hurt. It only helps. Public confidence goes a long way in getting our economy back on track. And I think a feeling of safety would be critical in that.
Well, right now, the world's largest economy, the United States, is suffering from massive unemployment. 43 states hit record high numbers for people out of work last month. So let's bring in CNN's Anna Stewart to break down all the numbers for us. Good to see you, Anna. So White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett predicts unemployment could be north of 20% in the month of May. But his colleague Larry Kudlow doesn't think that means people out of work need any additional help. What more are you learning about all of this?
Well, those comments from Larry Kudlow, frankly, will feel somewhat tone deaf to anyone who is currently unemployed or is worried that they could be in the coming weeks and months. Over 38 million people in the US have filed for initial unemployment aid since mid-March. That's nearly a quarter of the workforce, Rosemary. So it just gives you an idea of just how big a problem this is, and it won't be going away anytime soon. Sure, some states are reopening, some people are going back to work, and you can expect to see a little bit more hiring, certainly in the back half of this second quarter. However, when you look at businesses and sectors and different industries, they won't be going back to pre-pandemic norms in terms of revenue for months, for some of them, like travel industry, potentially even years. That we're looking at some slimmed down operations. We hear each week from more businesses having to file for bankruptcy, businesses having to lose jobs, and not all of those will be regained. So it is a huge problem. And you've got to also factor in, I think, with this sort of economic issue of jobs is the fear of losing your jobs and what that does to people in terms of spending. People's spending will reduce, and then you see a recession really get entrenched and really could be very prolonged. Rosemary?
Yeah, and the worry is some of these companies won't survive. But we'll keep a very close eye on all of that. Many thanks to you, Anna Stewart, joining us live from London. Well, Hong Kong police fired tear gas and arrested at least 180 protesters in clashes Sunday. Thousands of people marched against a controversial new national security law proposed by China. Multiple Hong Kong government departments are welcoming the mainland's proposal, which is the biggest threat to the city's autonomy and civil liberties since the 1997 handover from British control. China's rubber-stamped parliament, the National People's Congress, is set to vote on the security law later this week. And CNN's Stephen Jung joins me now from Beijing. Good to see you, Stephen. So Hong Kong made these numerous arrests Sunday at pro-democracy protests organised in response to China's National People's Congress, set to pass this controversial measure, these measures that will, of course, significantly impact protests like this. So talk to us about the latest and what the ramifications will be.
Well, Rosemary, from Beijing's perspective, the protest you just showed is exactly why they need to enact this law right now in Hong Kong. Because they say this kind of national security law would provide a basis to restore the rule of law in Hong Kong. That's why nearly 3,000 delegates of the National People's Congress met behind closed doors on Monday morning to deliberate this proposal. Now, its passage never in doubt because NPC, as you said, is largely ceremonial. But the reason Beijing has decided to act now is because they're losing patience. They're getting increasingly frustrated. 23 years after Hong Kong's sovereignty returned to Beijing, the local authorities still unable to enact a similar piece of law. They tried back in 2003, but that was met with huge protests on the streets, which is why the Hong Kong government had to shelve it and never reintroduced it. But with the latest protest movement from Hong Kong that really began last year and continued through this year despite a pandemic, the Beijing leadership is really seeing this notion of being reinforced in terms of the urgency and necessity to have such a legislation, have such a law in Hong Kong. Kong. And they are also increasingly seeing Hong Kong becoming this bastion of anti-China forces, not only with local pro-democracy activists, but also with a growing pro-independence movement, not to mention rampant interference or involvement of external forces, including the U.S. government, according to the Beijing leadership. That's why they decided to take the matter into their own hands by bypassing the Hong Kong legislature to enact this law from the central government. There are, of course, other calculations as well, with the U.S. still preoccupied with the pandemic, and they're probably expecting a weaker international pushback. And all of this, Rosemary, of course, is another sign of President Xi Jinping's increasing confidence in dealing all sorts of matters, because he is just, according to many analysts, feels less restrained by international implications or fear over international rebuke. Rosemary?
Right, Stephen Jiang, bring us the very latest from Beijing. Many thanks to you. Well, Benjamin Netanyahu is dismissing corruption charges as a political coup against him. On Sunday, Mr. Netanyahu became the first sitting Israeli Prime Minister to stand trial. He's facing charges of bribery, fraud and breach of trust in 3 separate criminal cases. Meanwhile, Prime Minister's rival, is coming to his defense, saying Mr. Netanyahu is innocent until proven guilty. Well, CNN's Oren Lieberman is following the trial and joins me now from Jerusalem. Good to see you, Oren. So, Prime Minister Netanyahu calling his corruption trial a political coup. What's the latest on this and where does it go from here?
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been fighting this day ever since the investigations were made public more than 3 years ago, and we saw that continue in the escalating rhetoric against not only the investigations, but also the judicial system, the media, and the left wing, saying this is how they're trying to topple him because they haven't been able to beat him at the ballot box. And we saw that as a continuation of the speech, with his most loyal ministers standing right beside him, wearing masks, of course, as he prepared for his first day of trial. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu entered room 317 of Jerusalem District Court, marking the start of his criminal trial. He stood defiantly, refusing to sit in the defendant's chair until the camera was removed from the courtroom. Inside, he told the 3-judge panel he understands the charges against him, bribery and fraud and breach of trust, but said little else during the hearing. In the State of Israel versus Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister fired his first shot before the hearing began.
Elements in the police and prosecution have aligned with the left-wing press in order to stitch up hallucinatory and false cases against me, with the aim of toppling a strong Prime Minister from the right.
The criminal trial is just beginning, expected to take years. But the court of public opinion, or at least its rival halves, decided long ago.
He's not allowed, and we're grateful about everything that he's doing.
Dueling protests faced off outside, those demonstrating in support of Netanyahu, those demonstrating against. No matter the outcome, half the country will feel their side lost. Senior members of Netanyahu's Likud party came to the courthouse to support the 70-year-old head of state. They stood behind their leader as he attacked the media and the judicial system.
I hear it from so many citizens telling me, be strong. We don't buy that nonsense. We all understand they stitched up a case against you. Elements in the police, the prosecution, the media are trying to commit a government coup against the will of the people.
Right before the hearing, Netanyahu held his new government's first cabinet meeting, where he spoke about coronavirus and the budget, showing it's business as usual. His coalition partner and former rival, who swore never to serve under an indicted politician, didn't mention the court proceedings either. This is the country's new normal, a prime minister on trial. As for what actually happened in court, the answer is not all that much. The first day of trial in Israel is largely procedural or technical, where the lawyers go back and forth about hearings and what evidence will remain confidential and what will be not confidential. In fact, the only thing Netanyahu had to say was that he understands the charges against him. At this stage, he doesn't yet have to enter a plea of guilt.